Oh, what did you say?
Hi,
I was sitting over here.
Okay.
I'm trying to get away.
I'm just messing with you.
So don't sit back and win.
See ya.
Thank you. So there I was.
Unmute. All right.
Monica, we're still having trouble hearing you. Could you please try unmuting yourself?
Oh. Yeah, well, I was going to attend, and then Ed was doing the whole shebang, and I would be the Vanna White, lovely assistant. And I was going to hopefully do some stuff.
Monica, I repeat, we still cannot hear you.
I unmuted. Is that the person who's doing it? I'm going to.
All right, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I think you had me muted. I was unmuted, but you had me muted, so that was part of the problem. Let's go ahead and get started. You're here today to hear about effective listening. I didn't realize this was a skill that had to be really learned and practiced until I joined Toastmasters several years ago. And the first time I had to do an evaluation, I realized it wasn't just going through the motions of listening. I really had to actively listen. Have you ever been asked, did you hear me? Are you listening to me? Or another variation of this question? Most people at some time in their life have. So right now, I would like for you to take a sheet of paper out if you don't have one in front of you. I'm going to read out some numbers. I want you to add them up and then record a final answer. And we'll see what everybody comes up with. You start with the figure of 1,000, add 10, add 1,000, add 30, add 1,000, add 50, add 1,000, and add 10. I'll give you just a second, and I would like for people to tell me what they've come up with for their number. Anybody have an answer?
4,100.
Okay. Anybody else?
2,100. 5,000.
Okay.
Oh, I got
45,000, 4,100. All right.
4,100.
Well, 4,100 is the correct answer for those of you that have that number. The reason other people are getting different numbers, a lot of people arrive at a lot of people get the 5,000, and the reason they get that, your brain starts to see a pattern forming, and you kind of check out. You subconsciously check out, and when I go through all the numbers and that last figure's 10, many people go with 1,000. So that's how they're coming up with the 5,000. If you got other things, then possibly you didn't listen to the instructions that I was giving as I was giving you the numbers, and you come up with a different variation. 4,100, you guys are awesome. You actually listen. Let's go to the next slide, Steve. So, hearing versus listening. Almost everyone can hear. It requires no level of response or effort on your part. Most people. Listening is an active skill. It requires attention, and at some point, it could require a response. When you're listening, you not only listen with your hearing, but there could be other communications going on, whether it's verbal or nonverbal or voice inflection. You're listening to that voice inflection. We speak at approximately 150 words per minute, but we hear at about 1,000 words per minute. So there's quite a bit of difference between what you're hearing and how you're listening and how we're speaking. 70% of the time we spend communicating. Out of that 70%, 30% is talking, 45% is listening. So you do a majority of that communicating by listening. Let's go to the next slide, Steve. Now, these are some pictures, and we're going to discuss them real quick. These are some of the things that could be preventing you from listening effectively. The far right-hand side, everybody is probably very familiar with this. It's a cell phone. And everybody seems to have them glued to their hand, their ear, or some other area that they're using them. You can see people at restaurants sitting across from each other, and they're holding their phones, and you're wondering, well, are they talking or texting each other, or how's that working for them? So the cell phones, the computers, all the technology has gotten to be a distraction from what we're actually listening to. The lady at the bottom left-hand side, she's multitasking. And I used to think I was a really good multitasker until I realized I can get more done correctly and efficiently if I just focus on one task at a time and finish that task versus trying to do multiple things and missing something or not understanding what someone's trying to tell me. And in the top picture, these two people are communicating, and you wonder if it's going to be a one-side communication or if there's going to be some understanding there or if they're actually checked out and they're multitasking. And a lot of times when you're looking at this, you want to find out, are you like not listening? Are you pretend listening? Are you partially listening? You're kind of hearing the conversation and then you're not really?
Stuff from your trade show.
How focused are you? You want to have some interpretive listening. Are you an interactive listener? Or are you an engaged listener? And these are some different things you can do while you're listening. Let's go to the next slide, Steve. So why do you listen? There's many reasons. These are just a few of those. You listen because you're trying to learn. You want to learn something, whether it's people talking to you or you're online listening to a video. You're actually trying to learn through that listening. You do it for enjoyment, music possibly. You want a reflection. You want to think about what's being said and reflect upon it. You want clarification for something that has been heard. You want to do a summarization, possibly look for direction, maybe some feedback or validation. So there's various reasons why you listen. Now let's talk about some of the stages to listen. So next slide, Steve. There are 5 stages to active listening. You're going to receive the message, whatever's being told to you. You want to understand it. You want to remember it. Then you want to evaluate it, and possibly you need to respond to it. So as you go through these stages of when you're listening, and this is all going on in the background while conversations are going on or you're talking to someone, this is how your brain is processing what is being told to you. Let's go to the next slide. Steve, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. An effective communication model. This is what we just went over. You've got a sender and a receiver. They're sending a message. And this person is hearing the response. Possibly the sender's clarifying, and then the receiver is going to confirm what they've heard. And there's different skills that take place while you're doing this. Let's go to the next slide. So these are 13 steps to better listening skills. And I run across these as I was doing some research for this. It's been several years ago, and I've done this presentation in variations of different kinds. So one of the first steps that you want to do when you're listening, you might want to restate. And the reason you'll restate, you're going to show that you're listening and that you're not parroting it back.
From a bigger phone too?
Excuse me, was there a question? Okay. For the reinstating, an example would be, let's see if I'm clear about this. And then you tell them, you restate what you've heard. That way they can either validate it or maybe restate it again. The next one is summarizing. This is going to bring the facts and pieces of the problem and help you understand. So an example of this would be, so it sounds to me as if, or is that it? And you're telling them what you heard. The next one is you use minimal encouragers. And this is along the lines of more in-room type communications, where you give positive prompts to keep the conversation going or show that you're listening. You might go, or, oh, I understand. Then, or and. Those are some things you can do to keep the conversation and let them know that you are listening. The next one is reflecting. Instead of just repeating back, reflect the speaker's words in terms of the feelings that they're communicating to you. This seems really important to you, and then explain why you feel that it's important to them. And they can tell you if that's the case. The next one is giving feedback. This lets the person know what your initial thoughts are on the situation. You're going to share pertinent information, observations, insights, and experiences, and then listen carefully to confirm. You can do emotional labeling. You're putting feelings into words, which will help the other person see it more objectively. The person, they could use like door openers. For example, I'm sensing that you're feeling frustrated or worried or anxious. You're telling them how you perceive their feelings or what they're stating. The next one is probing. You're asking questions to draw the person out and get a deeper and more meaningful understanding of the information that they're telling you. What do you think would happen if you? And then you add on to what they're telling you. The next one would be validation. You want to acknowledge the individual's problems, issues, feelings. You listen openly and with empathy. And then an example of that, I appreciate your willingness to talk about such a difficult issue. An effective pause, and this is where most people become uncomfortable between effective pause and silence. In our society, it seems like we just have to continually talk and talk and talk. But a pause at key points is a good way to demonstrate that you're emphasizing this point. This will tell the person that you have something important to say. Silence is golden. We could use more of it. And it allows for things to slow down in the exchange. It doesn't push the person. It gives them time to think. And it can be helpful in diffusing a situation if it's not a very productive conversation or a non-productive meeting. If you just take a moment and when you get silent, eventually even everybody in the room will stop and kind of look and try to figure out why it got quiet. iMessages. Anytime you go to give a person feedback or you're wanting to focus on the problem and not the person, an iMessage lets the person know what you feel and why. I know you have a lot to say, but I need to tell you something else. That way it tells them you're focusing on whatever problem you're addressing. Redirecting. If someone is showing signs of being like overly aggressive or maybe agitated or angry, this is the time to shift to another topic, and this allows you to redirect. One of the easiest ways I know how to tell somebody to redirect, whether it's a conversation or a question, watch the politicians. They are experts at redirecting. If you ask the question is asked for them and they don't know or they don't want to answer, they will redirect it to something that they want to speak about or some topic they want to get out there in the public. So a politician is excellent at redirecting. And then you have consequences. Part of this feedback might involve talking about the possible consequences of the interaction. You want to listen to what the person's saying and take the cue from that. You know, what happened the last time you stopped taking the medicine your doctor prescribed? That's kind of an example. That gives you an idea of, like, if you're in a meeting and someone asks you, well, okay, let's stop and think about the last time this occurred, what occurred because of that action or because of that statement. So those are some of the skills that can help you to listen better. I know as I was doing some of the research several years ago, there's different ways to ask questions when you're having a conversation with someone. And you can do leading questions. Like if you want to ask them something else, would you like to talk about it? Or could you tell me more? You can do open-ended questions, which kind of forces them to expand on what they've already told you. How, what, where, who, which, as part of the question that you ask back to whoever you're having the conversation with. You can do closed-ended questions as well. Another form of closed-ended questions would be, you start off the question, is, are, do, can, could. That leaves it more close to specifically what you're discussing. And there's also reflective questions where you can try to help the people understand more about what you're saying. I'm worried I won't remember. You know, maybe it sounds like you would like some help remembering. So that's different ways to do the reflective questioning. When I was going through some of the quotes, I ran across one that was from a U.S. government official. I know what you believe, you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. I had to stop and look at that quote because it just seemed to continually go on and actually say nothing. And I was just, I guess it is a U.S., you know, I don't know what the conversation was, but I would have really liked to have known what the body of the conversation was for that quote. Steve, can you go to the next slide, please? One of my favorite authors for several different books, Stephen Covey, he said most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And when I joined Toastmasters several years ago, part of being a Toastmaster is not only giving speeches, but you also have to evaluate the speakers and provide feedback. And the first time I saw this quote, I understood what he was saying, because I had been having conversations at various times, and I was really not trying to understand what the intent of people were telling me. I was going, okay, I need to talk about this, or I need to tell somebody about this. Or I've been in a platform and I've checked out and I'm doing like the laundry list, the grocery list, or things I need to do at the house. So now when I sit down to talk with people, I put everything aside and I focus on what they're saying. What's the intent? And it could be not only what they're saying, but it could be those nonverbal clues that I was talking about earlier as well. So if you can just focus and listen with the intent to understand, you will become a better listener, and you will be able to reply because you understand. Steve, if you could go to the next slide. This is where I got some of the information as I was doing different types of the research. So if you get a chance, you can take a look out there at some of these. There's definitely other tips and tools, but these are some of the techniques and items that I've used as I've progressed through my career and learned how to focus on people and listen. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I can leave you with when you go out to restaurants with people, put your cell phones away. Pay attention to the conversations at the table, and you will become a much better listener in that way. Does anyone have any questions?
This is Avis. I understand silence is golden, but there's one thing I wanted to say. I really appreciated the fact that you started off with your Toastmaster experience, because you and I had chatted about the fact I'm not a very good listener. Well, if it hadn't been for Toastmasters, I would be a lot worse listener than I am now. So I'm glad you used them as one of your sources.
It's definitely been a growing tool for me.
And I don't think people often pay often enough attention to nonverbal communication. And that is something else that I learned in Toastmasters. For example, one of the Toastmasters that I mentored for a couple of years, I noticed every so often she'd be standing up there talking and she'd start to curl her hair around her finger. And I finally figured out what was going on in her mind when she was doing that. And we spent a lot of time coaching and practicing to get her to recognize what she was going through and what she could do to alleviate that. And she hardly ever curls her hair around her finger anymore. But it takes practice.
A lot of times,
it's not
and
easy.
a lot of times people don't realize they're doing those nonverbal cues.
Exactly.
Until it's pointed out to them or somebody actually evaluates them and gives them feedback. And then you realize, I didn't know I was doing that. Thank you. You know, and it really helps you to improve your abilities.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about Toastmasters, because your evaluation is immediate. While it's fresh in everybody's mind, it isn't though a week or so later, someone sends you an email or a message or something, you know, talking about something that you said or didn't. By that time, you have no idea what they're talking about.
I agree.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself and stop talking.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Well, this is Steve. I have a comment when you were talking about making an effort to listen. I've had to learn to do this mainly because other people don't. And what I mean is, it drives me crazy when you're chatting with somebody and they are looking elsewhere, like checking the room. I realize at a party, there's probably someone more fun than I to talk with, and you're looking for an escape route. But you know, it is really annoying to be chatting with somebody and they can't make eye contact with you. You want to comment on that?
Absolutely. I agree with you on that. And that is one of the things I think we get so distracted with everything around us. I heard a report in the news not long ago that our attention span, adults I'm talking, attention span over the last 10 years has gone from 12 seconds to 6 seconds. And they're attributing a lot of this to the technology and our ever-firing mind going to jump around iPhone, jump around computer, and other things. It's like we are losing that focus to actually concentrate and pay attention to like a one-on-one conversation. And I agree with you completely. Especially if you're talking to someone. I've been talking to someone at their desk and the phone ring, and they would turn around and answer the phone in the middle of our conversation. That's just really poor etiquette. And two, it shows, well, were they even listening to what I was talking to them about? So, you know, definitely focus on that person, and whoever's calling you, they can leave a message. And whoever you're looking for, you can get with them after you finish that conversation.
Well said. Well said. From both
Are there
of you.
any other questions?
Hi, this is Mariah from Detroit. I was just wondering, so the first thing that you had us do, where did you get that from? Was that coming from one of these resources here with the 1,010?
It was an icebreaker that I have had for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. I can send it to Steve and ask him to send it out if you would like. I do that as well as another one when I'm doing this presentation, but because we weren't in person, the other one I use a sheet of paper and I give you a series of instructions. And when you finish with these series of instructions, you should have something that looks like a snowflake, but nobody ever has the same piece of paper. And I'm giving the same instructions to everyone.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Coming from a position of a leader, you know, it's good to have those type of icebreakers to be able to give to our staff at meetings and things like that. And, you know, this is a key topic that anyone could use. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. I will get the information out on those two icebreakers to Steve, and he can send them out to the group. And if you have any questions after you look at them, you know, feel free to reach out to me. I'll answer any questions that you might have or anything else.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will be happy to do that. Why don't we ask people to share their pet peeves? I shared mine about eye contact. Anybody else have something you want to throw into the mix here?
My pet peeve is something that Monica already mentioned at the beginning. The people with the cell phone in their hands. One of my anime friends, who shall remain nameless, Steve, and it's not you.
Thank you.
Carries his cell phone all the time, and he gets very upset with me because I do not have a cell phone. I wouldn't have a cell phone if you paid me. And he just got very upset with me one day, and I finally looked and I said, look, you have interrupted this meeting 7 times to take phone calls. You know, you have cost us time, you have cost us money, we've lost concentration and had to go back and redo something because of these interruptions. I said, you think this is, you know, it's bad form. And that's my pet peeve, and it's getting worse and worse all the time. I mean, I
agree.
understand people have to communicate, but there's a time and a place for everything.
Well
okay,
said.
I'm going silent.
Steve, thank you for opening up this opportunity. This is Tia with Detroit. One of my pet peeves, and I think Monica had mentioned it, when you're listening, to kind of share and say, you know, give little cues that you're listening. But sometimes we can do it excessively, where you say, okay, and it comes off as if that person's not listening. So that's one of my pet peeves. We do have one more that someone wants to share here in Detroit.
Okay.
Hello, this is Gloria. Actually, I am the culprit of the pet peeve, and I know a lot of my colleagues say that I do this because I am a habitual multitasker. So when they ask me questions, I have an issue with stopping doing what I'm doing and they will have their entire spiel. And then I'll stop and I'll say, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Can you repeat that again? So this kind of helped me to identify the fact that I have to stop doing what I'm doing so that people understand that I'm actively listening when they are coming to me for support.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a long time to break that habit. Excellent.
Hi, I'm Juana from Detroit, and what my pet peeve is when I'm speaking to a person and I'm talking, and then when they respond back, they'll respond with something off the topic, so they hadn't heard anything I said.
And that's where paraphrasing, I think, really helps to communicate, because you're not parroting exactly what you said back. You're phrasing it for yourself, and you're letting that person know you actually understand what they're saying.
Okay, this is some good stuff. Keep it coming.
Hi, this is Yolanda from Detroit, and so I'm guilty of my pet peeve, and when others do it, I get mad at them, but when I do it, I understand. And that is listening to respond.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is one of the number one things that we do. And so what are some things or some resources that I can share in my coaching or with my team to how we can stop to listen and not to respond?
I think the icebreaker that I shared with you is a good example.
Yeah.
Everybody gets the same information, but if you're not listening to what is being said, your brain checks out and you get those weird numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good example that you need to really listen to what someone is telling you.
You know, Monica. Oh,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Say
Somebody.
this again. Isn't it interesting that some of our pet peeves that we're discussing are things we recognize we're guilty of?
I'm not saying I'm unguilty. I'm guilty of some of them too. I have to stop myself quite often and go, wait a minute, you're not paying attention.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that's good about Toastmasters. You find out about those the hard way.
Usually after a speech.
Oh, yes.
You know, Monica, one of the things I've observed over the years is that everybody's workplace is a little bit different in terms of allowing people to use their devices. I know some of you have told me that when you go into a meeting, everybody's devices are off. A lot of you go into meetings and people realize you're busy and they think you can multitask, so it's okay. And I think each of us have a different level of our ability to cope with that. But my favorite story, which Sue and Robin on the NMA staff knows, is that a few years ago I was keynoting at an event and someone said to me outside, "Oh, I'm looking forward to your presentation." And this person came up and sat at one of the front tables right down below me and proceeded to get out his or her device and was on it the entire time I was speaking. The longer I stood there, the madder I got. And I thought, this is why there are concealed carry laws, because I would just as soon have blown that person away, because it was so distracting and it made me so mad. I could barely concentrate on what I was doing. So ever since then, and I'm guilty like the rest of us, every once in a while I'll, for whatever reason, need to take a sneak peek at something. But I think in public, certainly trying to mind our P's and Q's and realize someone is there speaking for a reason, and to defer to them and to give them the common courtesy of at least appearing like you're listening is pretty important. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
I completely agree with that.
Common courtesy.
Yes. And it shows that you're actually, if you're not engaged and not listening, you're doing other things. And the nonverbal is just as important as any verbal that you could do. And when you're in a large setting, I got to listen to a speaker several years ago, and he gave tips on nonverbal communication and what to look for and how to go about either changing it for them, you know, as you speak, different ways to work for nonverbal communication. And that was the best speech and the most useful that I'd ever heard, so that when I get up in an auditorium of 500 people to give a speech, I start looking at nonverbal right away. And that electronics is definitely a nonverbal cue. I'm here, but I'm not really. I'm listening, kind of. I might pay attention here and there. That tells you that person is not as interested in what you're speaking about.
Yes, this is Lloyd from Detroit. To the gentleman that just said about the concealed weapons, little tip for you: when you're facilitating the group and that happens, you may want to try going to stand by the person, walk around the room, and maybe make eye contact with the person. There's different ways to get the person's attention instead of getting angry and interrupting your own flow and mental state of mind.
And another thing you might do before you start your speech, Steve, if you ever have that happen again, is lay some ground rules for the speech. People don't like it a lot of times, but other people are very respectful of it.
Well, and you know, you can do these kind of things and have a little fun with it. I recently I was at a workshop, and everybody in the audience was a college student. And when I started, I looked out over the audience and I said, before we get going, I have a question. I said, are any of you on a wait list for a lung or a heart transplant? And everybody looked at me like my last marble was about ready to roll down the aisle. And I didn't have any takers. And I said, well, if you're not waiting on the Mayo Clinic to call, may I ask you to turn off your phones for the next 30 minutes? And
that's a good one.
Well, I got a chuckle out of it. It made the point without my being too dictatorial about it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You know, sometimes
remember that one.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's politically incorrect in some way, shape, or form, and got the point made. All right, let's do one last round. Anybody else want to contribute anything here before we close? Okay, then, Monica, you were very kind to rise to the occasion and help us out by facilitating this month. I can tell our audience enjoyed it because not a single person has dropped off. Oh, and by the way, I want to throw myself under the bus. I was the idiot that had her muted. We were trying to get going. You were in here, you were in the system twice, once with video, but I didn't see the phone number that had scrolled up. So I muted you. So I apologize for being an idiot. So hopefully this afternoon we'll get it right. So I want to thank everybody for joining in today. We enjoy doing these webinars for you. Monica, I appreciate your time twice today, and allow me to wish everyone a great weekend.
Yes. Very well
Thank
done.
you. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.